Have you ever wondered what it felt like in Africa before the coming of Europeans? I mean, were there people living in Africa before the Europeans even came? What were their lives like? And how were they organized as a society? Well, let's explore that in this lesson. African societies existed and were highly organized before the arrival of the Europeans. In pre-colonial Africa, there were kingdoms and empires. Now, these kingdoms had their cultures, leaders, and structures. The first time Europeans landed in Africa was around the 15th century. These Europeans were the Portuguese. They first came to the Congo Kingdom in northwestern Angola from 1482 to 1483. After over 10 years, a Portuguese explorer known as Vasco da Gama sailed along the east coast of Africa. Now, this was the first recorded interaction of Africans with Europeans, and it began in 1482. But Africa had empires and societies that existed before the arrival of Europeans. The Benin Empire, for instance, was established around the 11th century. In Europe, this period coincided with the beginning of the Middle Ages. The Benin Kingdom was one of the most developed and oldest kingdoms in Africa. The kingdom had a ruler who was a monarch called the Oba. Monarchy was already practiced in pre-colonial Africa long before the coming of the Europeans. In fact, African societies were structured into centralized and decentralized societies. Now, centralized societies were societies where power flowed from the top down. These societies had monarchs that governed their societies and made decisions for the rest of the society. In some societies, these monarchs were even treated as deities. Centralized societies were very common in pre-colonial African societies. The Benin Kingdom, the Oyo Empire, the Sokoto Caliphate, and the Dahomey Empire are examples of centralized pre-colonial African societies. Now, Africa has a very rich history, and the coming of the Europeans into Africa is not the beginning of Africa's history. It is just a fraction of our history. So, what have we learned from this lesson? First, we have learned that Africa had organized societies long before the Europeans came. We have also learned that the first Europeans to land in Africa were the Portuguese, who landed in 1482. Lastly, we have learned that pre-colonial African societies can be structured into centralized and decentralized societies. Great! In another lesson, we shall be discussing the decentralized African societies. Bye, my friend.